One thing that I have learnt about communication that I've kind of always known, but never really been able to land on properly is until this year, really, it's really landed this year, is how communicating is not, it is not an intellectual process. There is no like strategy or format that I could give you that anyone can realistically give you and say, yep, this is how you communicate, this is what you do, and this is the answer to every time this situation comes up. Like there's no script as such. Scripts can help and they can give you like an idea of, where to go, or, finding that feeling for yourself. But what we aren't able to access with scripts is this embodied understanding of what's happening in the moment, especially when it comes to interacting and engaging with other people. So when we are in that space of relying on an intellectual process, we're not actually checking in with how your body feels when someone says something. So you may not be accessing the actual true reaction or response that your body is giving you, that your nervous system is giving you, that all of these things are showing up as, that inform you and inform your actual truth in the situation. So when we rely on an intellectual process for our communication, for our interactions, it becomes way less true to you and way more focused on like there's a separation that happens. There's a separation that happens when you rely on a script, or you rely on a this is what I should do, or you rely on something that doesn't actually inform you of what it is, or how you want to interact, or how you want to be, or what the next step is, what the actual response is, what you choose to have your response be as well. So there's a lot going on when it comes to communication, and I know that communication and certain conversations can bring up a lot of stuff in the moment. So you're kind of like flailing about, you're kind of in the washing machine of the ocean of where is the next wave coming from? What am I doing next? How do I want to respond to this? What's happening? And you're in that space of, holy hell, what do I do? And you're just trying to find some solid ground. You're trying to find some steadiness here that can give you something. You're grasping for something. So when you're in that space, especially with certain conversations that will come up in life, that will happen in life, when you're in that space, it changes your ability to respond as easily. I'm not saying it stops you from being able to respond, but it changes your ability, because if it's an activating conversation, or if it's something that you don't like, that you feel nervous about or emotionally invested in, or any of the things that are a complete human experience, if you're in that conversation and these things come up, when you are left feeling like you're grasping for just something steady and something solid to give yourself a sense of foundation, it can be really challenging to respond, which means that our intellectual processes are less online. Because when our brains step into that stress mode, our intellectual processes aren't the priority. When our brains are in that stress mode, our bodies are in that stress mode, really, but our brains switch into, where's the survival? What can I do to get out of this? How do I get out of this? What's the quickest and most efficient way of getting out of this so I know that I'm surviving and I'm okay? So the thing with that is, that is where we want to be able to then have this embodied process in practice. Not perfected, because there's no such thing, but it's an embodied process in practice of how we communicate, how we tap into what's happening, how we ground and anchor in to what makes us feel calmer, to what makes us feel grounded enough to give a response, especially if the conversation has gone the way that we may not want it to have, or especially if you just don't know what's happening. So this is why I'm on a mission to start bringing in this understanding and this idea of how we communicate, how it has to come from an embodied place, how it has to come from this deeper understanding of ourselves in order for us to be more comfortable with the discomfort that shows up, in order for us to be more able to weather the discomfort and know that that is a normal part of the process. None of this is about telling yourself that you will get, or me telling you rather, even, none of this is about me telling you or you telling yourself that you'll get to a place where you're really comfortable and only ever comfortable, and then there will never be any discomfort ever again. All of this is about going, you can find comfort in the discomfort, which is a different thing than being comfortable or expecting yourself to feel comfortable, or expecting it to always be easy, for example. Sometimes it will be, and this is the thing, part of this process of changing your perception around these conversations, around this communication, around these things, part of that process is purely to create more ease. But the ease isn't because everything becomes easy. The ease is because you've decided that you don't need it to be easy to find comfort in it, or to be able to weather it, or to be able to get through it. I laugh because I just had that line from the Hulk in the Avengers movie, like the first of the Avengers movies, and how he's like, that's the secret. I'm always angry, right? So there's an embracing that happens. I'm not talking about anger, but it's a good example. There's an embracing that happens when we go, oh, it might always be a little bit uncomfortable, but how can I shift my relationship with that discomfort and choose to be in it and practice regulating my nervous system and practice noticing that what is feeling flooding is part of that nervous system response, and not having to be caught up in it. That is the practice of, like, this is how we get to be in relationship with that, rather than seeing everything as a threat on top of the reaction that your nervous system might already be having, which might be saying, oh, this is a threat already. So rather than stacking perceived threat on top of perceived threat on top of perceived threat, you get to go, okay, I'm noticing this more. I have tools that I can use. This is like the last the last time I had to have one of these challenging conversations, I used my tools. I leaned into them like hardcore and went just full out, went, you know what, okay, like within me went, this is what I need right now, because it felt like an intense conversation, and there was an intense response happening for me. So, like those tools that I leaned into were things like anchoring it, squeezing my arms and my legs, or wherever I could reach subtly in the conversation to ground in, to make my body feel safe. I used just the awareness of my breath, of slowing down my breath, of slowing down my exhale, of just tracing my breath, even if I couldn't do anything, or even whatever I was doing, just tracing my breath in and then out, and then in and then out. And just tracing that as an anchoring point as well. Sometimes our breath isn't coming, or sometimes it's not accessible. So that's where the physical, like anchoring in, helps. I also picked fixed points for my eyes to look at. I picked fixed points not because I wasn't being present, but because I knew that if my eyes went to like looking around the room, there was a lot more stimulation and a lot more information being absorbed in. So I would pick fixed points to just look at while I traced my breath, or while I anchored in, while I did what I needed to do to ground, to be in my body without being caught up in what was happening, so that I could then respond. And the thing with this, again, is that I wasn't comfortable. There was no point that I was like completely comfortable. My voice still shook when I responded. There was still, you know, this heightened sense. There was still stuff going on. But I was leaning into, when I say being comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, what I mean is leaning into this, acceptance that there is going to be discomfort, rather than resisting it. Because a lot of the time, the resistance is what creates a lot more of the challenge. A lot of the time, the pushback is because I'm creating that pushback myself. So it's, being comfortable isn't about, oh, I feel so relaxed and, you know, all of these things all of the time. Sometimes, like, the more you practice this, the more you realize that there is a capacity there. So what it is isn't about going, oh yeah, I just feel so relaxed about all of these conversations. It's almost an acceptance of, this might be an uncomfortable conversation, but I've expanded my capacity to be in that. I've expanded my capacity to handle myself in that and show up how I would want to be showing up in that. I've expanded my capacity in all of those things, so I can have a level of removing resistance from that discomfort. I can have a level of knowing that there might be uncomfortable moments, or that I might feel uncomfortable because I don't know what the response will be, or I might have to sort of sit and let the other person respond once I've said my piece. Or I might say my piece and then immediately step into a vulnerability hangover, or whatever it is, right? Like, there might be all of these different things that show up. I'm just going to bring this up because I can't see anything. So there might be all of these moments, but I've expanded my ability to be in that with them. I've expanded my ability to just hold myself and be okay and know that I'm okay, even if I feel uncomfortable. Like, my capacity to know that I'm like, and show myself that I am still safe. Hi, Jenna. That I am still safe will change how I'm able to then show up. That is the difference. That is what being comfortable in uncomfortable conversations really, really means. That is what that comes from. It's not going, I have all of the intellectual processes in place, I have a plan, I have a script, and like, when I'm you know, like in it, I can just whip out this script and, you know, be in it. That's not what it's about. There's no intellectual process that will work for you in real time. There, again, like I said, there are intellectual processes that will help as part of the embodiment practice of how you then communicate and show up in your interactions, but they are not the answer when you're in it. The answer for when you're in it is having practiced these different tools that make you feel safe, having the awareness on an embodied level. So rather than just keeping it here and going, yep, I know that this is what's going to happen. Again, that can be the conduit. That awareness can be really, really useful if it helps you then drop in. So that can be the conduit and going, yeah, I know that this may be uncomfortable. But then what happens when you're in it, when you step into it, is you get to then be okay. And I also have these tools around me. And I've also practiced certain things in different ways outside of this interaction or any of these interactions. And I have practiced it enough to then be able to step into and go, I have a different perception of what uncomfortable is or what comfortable is. I have this understanding that it's not actually about being comfortable, like I've got cushions and blankets around me. Sometimes you will have interactions that feel that way. Absolutely. But when it comes to like bearing your soul in any way and being vulnerable is how we connect. I'm not talking about unearned vulnerability, but being vulnerable is how we connect and how we lead the way, right? Sometimes it calls for one person in a conversation, in an interaction, to step into that, to give permission to those other people involved to also step into that. So we could all like sit around the edges in the shallows and be like, well, I could be vulnerable, but I'm not going to because they're not doing it. It takes one person to step a little bit deeper and be like, hey, look, I'm willing. Are you? So being in that space, yeah, like being in that space is what it is about. It's not that there is going to be a comfort all of the time. It's not that you're going to enjoy it all of the time, or you might enjoy it. There might be a level of that, but what it is going, okay, and I'm leaning in and knowing that discomfort doesn't equal unsafe, or that I'm not able to be or feel safe. And this is like the crux of where it's getting to, right? Like there is all of these pieces. And then when you're able to be in that space and show up in that way, in these conversations, when you're able to do that, you are able to then respond from here. You're able to then respond from here rather than responding from here where you think you should. Because sometimes when we respond from our heads, we don't give the answer that feels best for us. We don't give, like, we don't say our truth necessarily, you know, whatever it is, we're not able to step into that space because we're so busy being here and going, intellectualizing shit and going, this is what I should do, this is what I think I should do, this is the next step, this is the thing, this is the thing, this is the thing. That we forget to act. And when we do that, we often walk away from the conversation and go, oh, I wish I'd said that, or I don't really feel like I expressed myself properly, or I don't really feel like my needs have been met because, and if you have this awareness, because I didn't actually say what my needs are, or ask for them, or do the thing, you know, like let them be known. I didn't actually get what I needed to get from that conversation. If you have that self-awareness that you can go, yeah, because I didn't ask for it. I didn't say it because I was so busy going like from here of where I think I should be, or should do, or should, versus from here and going, this is what I'm feeling. So you see the difference there between intellectualizing everything. There is a place for the intellectual process, absolutely. But do you see the difference between intellectualizing everything versus like dropping in and going, okay, and I can't intellectualize what I want in a way of expressing. I can share, and when you're in this embodied place, go, yeah, cool, I respect what you're saying. I don't understand it, or I don't, like, I see it a different way, and I can respect it. That's an embodied response. The intellectual response will be in the trying to figure it all out. If you've ever been in any kind of conversation with me like that's a little bit deeper, you see that I'm constantly like stepping between the two. Because I'm always trying to, like, what's the solution? Let me, like, let me sort it out. And this is the practice, right? So it's not that I'm sitting here being like, I've got it all figured out, and I have always had it all figured out. That's the opposite. The reason I'm sharing this is because I go through it with you. I've been in it with you. So what it is going, yeah, I get to actually express myself when I'm in more of that embodied place. My responses are more truthful to the other person when I'm in that embodied place. Because that's really what the other person wants as well, whether they know it or not. They're in their own process. But when you're able to respond more truthfully to what it is you want, or what it is that you need, or how it is that you feel about the conversation, or what is being said in the conversation, or the direction of whatever it is, the more that you are able to share from that place of, this is how I'm feeling about this, and I've done this, and I talk about doing this, and I've done this. We go, yeah, I feel really vulnerable because I don't know what the response is going to be, or I feel really nervous, or I'm struggling to find my words, but this is where it starts. There is a softening in that, and you get so much further, and you get also a lot more connection with the other person or people involved when you are able to come from that place. Without it, it remains this very clinical interaction that is more about, well, okay, this and then this and then this is the plan, and this is, this is what we agreed on, and blah blah blah, rather than an actual connection. So you can see, like, there is a, for an intellectual process, sometimes there is a place for it, but at the same time, most of the time when we're talking about communication, when people are talking about feeling uncomfortable, it's because they want the connection, they want the understanding, they want to feel understood, they want to understand the other person, and they want to be in a space where they're sharing their truths and understanding, because the other person has been able to share how they feel, and they've been able to share how they feel, and like, it's a deeper thing that comes from the heart. So it might sound like I'm like, just be embodied in how you communicate. It is a process, and and it will always continue. Like, before I ran my Boundaries 101 course in May, holy hell, that was May, right? Before I ran that in May, I thought I was pretty good with boundaries, like, and I still kind of do. I'm realizing where I'm not, but like, I thought I was pretty good with boundaries, like, leading into it, right? But throughout that course, and directly after also, and still ongoing, but like specifically around those times, throughout that course, I realized and then started setting boundaries in areas that I didn't even recognize like a week before, but also wouldn't have ever dreamed of setting a week before. I facilitated that course, and I wouldn't have even dreamed of setting those boundaries like even a week before, because I didn't recognize them. So the more that we talk about it also, the more that you get to be in it and peel back the layers. So it's not about It's not about this intellectual process. I keep coming back to that. It's not about the intellectual process, because if I'd stayed in the intellectual process, I'd have been like, well, this is boundaries 101, and that's it. There's nowhere to go from there because it's an intellectual process and this is it, right? If I'd stayed there, it would have been a very different few months. Put it that way. But also I wouldn't have expanded and grown and learned. And in that expansion and in that embodiment of what we're doing and what we're practicing and what we're, being, we build our empathy. And this is the whole point too. We build our empathy the more we understand ourselves in that. We build our capacity to recognize and respect another person's process or feelings or emotions, even if we don't understand them. Even if we see things differently, we still build our capacity in this practice of feeling more at peace rather than stepping into that over control about other people and their stuff when they're a whole other person. But we build and expand our capacity for empathy, which gives us a lot more peace. You can see that circle immediately there. Rather than being in the confusion and I don't understand and trying to figure it out because you're in the intellectual process of like, oh, this is what's happening and all of the things, you have embodied this understanding of how you feel and what's showing up for you in these conversations. It is far, far easier to then have empathy for the other person, knowing that they are going through their own process. And they might be expressing whatever it is that they need. And if whatever they need, we don't understand, that is part of the being comfortable with the discomfort of not understanding and being able to lean into going, yeah, okay, I don't understand, but I respect that there is a need that you're expressing. I respect that you might be in a place that you don't quite, you don't feel like you are able to express, and then obviously, like, at some point, boundaries come in there as well. You still have needs. That is a whole other conversation. But when you're in that space of going, yeah, okay, this is where I'm at, and I because I've gone through a process of understanding of where I'm at, I now have capacity to have empathy that this other person might be in their own process of where they're at. I don't need to understand it. Because if I'm trying to understand it as my own, I'm in the intellectual, I'm not in the embodied. I might understand it, but if I don't and I'm still trying to figure it out, that's figuring it out from up here, rather than being in it and going, okay, I could try and figure it out, and that's a whole process and thing too that could be useful. But if doing that creates a sense of resistance, then you're making it harder on yourself. So that's really my understanding of what I've come to my understanding of embodied communication. That's really what I feel it to be. That is really what I've learnt in all of the time that I have studied, literally studied. Like, I have 2 degrees in communication in some way, like communication and public relations, like, so relating to the public. But like, that's what I've understood, that I have both studied and experienced in workplaces and experienced in my business over the years as my business has formed its own understanding of what it wants to be, as I've formed my understanding of what I want it to be, what I want to be doing, and what I've experienced big time in like my personal interactions. There are so many conversations that I wish I could go back to from this place now and be like, and these are like, I feel like ancient, because I recognize me in it, but I don't recognize me in those, like these years past now. But there are so many that I'm like, no, I wonder if that period of my life would have felt so much easier in some way because I was creating so much resistance because I wasn't in this place now. There are so many conversations that I wish I could go back to and respond a little differently. And lean into the discomfort a little differently rather than pushing back because I couldn't understand it because I was trying to figure it out with my head rather than feeling into it and going, you know what, maybe this is just the process. And I don't stay in that, but I recognize it. That there is this part of me that's like, yeah, I wish I could. But what we can do from wherever we're at is show ourselves a little bit of grace for that. Because this is part of the learning, this is part of the growing, the being human, the doing the things, showing ourselves a little bit of grace for that instead, and recognizing that we're always doing the best we can with what we know, showing ourselves a bit of grace for that so that we can then step into and go, okay, now that I might know a little bit more, what can I do to practice something? What can I do to recognize or list out or have an understanding of the things, the actions, the tools, like I said, that make me feel safe, that I can access during the challenging conversations? What can I do on a self-awareness level, which, by the way, is pillar 1 of the emotional intelligence training that I deliver in many different ways, including in Master Your Emotional Self. But like, that is self-awareness of like, what can I do to build genuinely more of an idea of self-awareness so that way I have this foundation of what is mine and what is not mine also, especially in our interactions. So this is where we can start to make that difference for ourselves. This is where we can start to shift and change how we approach these different things. This is where we get to feel a little more love for ourselves also, because it's building a self-trust and going, you know, I have this awareness. Or maybe the awareness is, yeah, when this kind of conversation comes in, I have this reaction. Okay, cool. Might not immediately change, but it may start something in a really useful way, just being aware of that.